He was the king of rock and roll. But behind the stage, one of the most secret and vulnerable moments of his life almost exploded publicly. A hidden letter, a girl of just 14, and Elvis himself begging his girlfriend not to tell anything. This is the little-known chapter between Elvis, Anita Wood, and Priscilla Presley, and today we will unravel it step by step with dates, emotions, and curiosities you probably never heard. Stay with me until the end, because the story reveals what lay behind the bright light of the stages. He was the most famous man in America. Crowds screamed his name, newspapers plastered his face, and every note he sang seemed to set the world on fire. But far from the stages, Elvis Presley sought something no fame could buy: a sense of normalcy. It was 1957, and at the height of his fame, he meets Anita Wood, a talented and charming young woman who seemed to offer exactly that. While the world saw the idol, she saw the man. Anita was a constant presence in Memphis, known for her charisma and beauty. When she entered Elvis's life, he had already become the king of rock, owner of hits like Hound Dog and Love Me Tender, but lived surrounded by pressures and a frantic lifestyle. Anita appeared as a safe harbor. They met through close friends and quickly became inseparable. She accompanied him on trips, at filmings, backstage at shows, and on quiet nights at Graceland. It was the kind of love that seemed simple, but carried the weight of being beside a myth. Elvis called Anita Little, an affectionate nickname that revealed the singer's softer side. He said she was the only person who could make him forget the world outside. To friends at the time, Anita was the official girlfriend, the woman the king truly loved before the army changed the course of everything. Graceland, newly purchased, was beginning to come to life. The couple spent hours watching old movies in the private cinema, cooking together, and listening to gospel records. Despite the chaos surrounding Elvis, there was a calm when she was around. But Elvis Presley's world was never common. In 1958, at the peak of his career, he was drafted to serve in the American Army. The news fell like a bomb among fans and deeply shook his relationship with Anita. During the training period, the two kept in constant contact. He wrote letters, called whenever he could, and made promises that everything would remain the same when he returned. Elvis believed military service would make him more respected, more mature, and said that upon returning, he wanted a stable life. Anita believed him. While Elvis was in Germany, Anita remained faithful, refusing job opportunities in television and radio. Many friends advised her to move on, but she insisted their love was real. During this time, Elvis lived the experience of military service surrounded by responsibilities and loneliness. And it was in this phase that he met a young girl named Priscilla Presley, the daughter of an American officer. This meeting, apparently innocent, would change the course of his life forever. But at that moment, Anita had no idea what was happening on the other side of the ocean. The relationship between Elvis and Anita began to suffer the effects of distance. Letters became less frequent, calls shorter, and promises began to sound different. Still, Anita remained loyal. She believed that when Elvis returned, everything would go back to how it was before. And, in fact, when he returned to the United States in 1960, the first person he wanted to see was her. Photos from the time show the two together, smiling, trying to start over. But there was something different in Elvis's look, a restlessness that Anita perceived even without understanding. Closest friends noticed Elvis was torn between the past and the present. He spoke about Germany with a melancholic tone, mentioned a girl very young, very sweet, who reminded him of his youth. Anita felt the weight of this mystery, but preferred not to ask. She still believed their love would be enough to overcome anything. However, Elvis's absences became more frequent, commitments longer, and the feeling that something was being hidden grew every week. Even so, Anita continued by his side. She attended events, traveled with the crew, and tried to preserve what remained of normalcy in a life surrounded by cameras and secrets. Elvis, in turn, seemed increasingly torn between the man he wanted to be and the image the world demanded of him.
It was a period where fame and responsibility left him emotionally exhausted. He was the idol of millions, but on the rare nights he turned off the spotlights, he was just a boy from Mississippi trying to balance success with personal life. The beginning of the 60s marked the end of innocence for Elvis and Anita. She still believed marriage would be the next step, but he already carried doubts within himself that he didn't know how to express. The weight of his career, memories of Germany, and the presence of someone new in his mind began to erode what was once a pure love. Anita, without realizing it, was about to become part of one of the most complex and painful stories of the king's life. This first chapter isn't just about romance. It's about the cost of fame, the conflict between duty and desire, and the impact the world had on a man who, despite being seen as invincible, was deeply human. Elvis truly loved Anita, but destiny pushed him onto a path where heart and reason never walked side by side. And when the military plane landed on American soil, bringing back the hero in uniform, Anita believed the fairy tale would continue. Little did she know that, somewhere between Memphis and Germany, a new story had already begun, and it would change everything. When Elvis Presley embarked for Germany in 1958, the whole world watched the king of rock transform into a common soldier. He was 24 years old and leaving behind fame, Graceland, and Anita Wood, the woman many believed to be his true love. But the army wasn't just a pause in his career, it would be the turning point in his personal life. It was there, far from the stages and the crowd, that a new story began to form, a story he would try to hide at all costs. During the time in Friedberg, Elvis lived under constant surveillance by the press. Even so, he tried to keep a simple routine. He exercised, wrote letters to Anita, and received occasional visits from friends of the Memphis Mafia, his inner circle. It was a period of loneliness and reflection. It was in this environment, in September 1959, that he met Priscilla Presley. She was only 14 years old and the daughter of an American Air Force officer. The family lived on the same military base, and the meeting between the two happened at a small party at a mutual friend's house. Priscilla was shy but had a striking presence. Elvis was impressed by her resemblance to his mother, Gladys, who had passed away shortly before. This emotional detail had a profound weight on him. Close friends said that from the first moment, Elvis treated the girl with kindness and protection. He saw her as sweet company, someone who made him forget the pressure and pain he carried. Gradually, she began visiting his house with her parents' permission, always accompanied in supervised and apparently innocent meetings. But the intensity with which Elvis attached himself to Priscilla grew every week. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ocean, Anita remained faithful and confident. She believed in the promises Elvis had made before leaving. But time and distance were changing things. Elvis's letters became rarer, and their tone was no longer the same. When he returned to the United States in 1960, he brought back a new layer of feelings he himself didn't yet understand. Elvis was torn. On one side, there was Anita, the mature woman, companion, with whom he built a solid story. On the other, a young and idealized memory from Germany, which attracted him inexplicably.
Anita, oblivious to everything, tried to rebuild the relationship. She started visiting him in Hollywood, where he filmed and recorded nonstop. On one of these trips, according to her accounts, Anita found a letter addressed to Elvis. The sender was Priscilla. The letter spoke of longing and the possibility of visiting Graceland. Anita was confused, and when she confronted Elvis, he reacted evasively. He said Priscilla was just a girl, that it was all innocent, and that the press could ruin his reputation if the story came out. It was at this moment that, according to Anita, Elvis begged her not to tell anyone. He reportedly said, "She's just a child. If this gets out, it will finish me." That conversation deeply marked Anita. On one side, there was the man she loved asking for trust. On the other, the intuition that something was very wrong. Elvis tried to circumvent the situation, promising Priscilla was just a friend, a distant memory. But the calls started becoming more frequent, and the climate of doubt grew. Anita found herself trapped in a web of secrets. She still loved Elvis, but felt she was losing him every day. The tone of conversations between them changed. He was more distant, more restless, as if carrying a weight he couldn't share. The following years showed that the bond with Priscilla wasn't something fleeting. Even living in the United States, Elvis kept in contact with her. The Beaulieu family was even approached by Elvis himself, who wanted to maintain the relationship on the condition that everything remained discreet. He feared scandal, but also couldn't detach himself. It was as if he lived two parallel lives, one with Anita, before the eyes of the press, and another with Priscilla, hidden, fueled by phone calls and promises. For Anita, this was devastating. She began to notice Elvis's attitude changed whenever the subject came up. He became defensive, guilty, and sometimes even melancholic. The weight of fame and the secret began to affect his professional routine as well. During a recording in 1960, Elvis seemed distracted and emotionally shaken. Close friends reported he spoke about not wanting to hurt anyone, but seemed lost between duty and desire. He still said he loved Anita, but the bond with Priscilla attracted him in a way he couldn't explain or control.
The request for silence made to Anita shows a human side of Elvis few knew. He wasn't just the star surrounded by glamour, but also a man afraid of consequences. He knew if the press discovered he was maintaining contact with a teenager, his image could be destroyed. For an artist of his magnitude, this meant not only the end of his career, but also the rupture with the public that worshipped him. The secret became a shadow hovering over every decision he made. Pause here, because this is a very delicate situation. Do you think Elvis was acting only out of fear of destroying his career, or was he really living an impossible dilemma to resolve? What would you do if you were in Anita's place upon discovering this secret? Leave your opinion here in the comments. I really want to know what you think. Anita carried this pain in silence. For years, she avoided talking about the subject, perhaps out of loyalty, perhaps out of shame. What happened between Elvis, Anita, and Priscilla during this period is one of the most complex and sensitive passages of the king's life. It isn't just about a love triangle, but about a conflict between youth and responsibility, between the myth and the man. Elvis Presley lived intensely, and that intensity led him to seek love and understanding in unlikely places. When he asked Anita to keep the secret, he wasn't just protecting his own reputation. He was trying to preserve what remained of the private life fame had already stolen. It was the gesture of someone who, even on top of the world, feared losing what mattered most, the image of a good man in the eyes of those who loved him. And it was this fear that made him create a barrier between the public and the truth. A wall that would only crumble years later when all of Graceland's secrets finally came to light. When Anita Wood decided to put a final end to the relationship with Elvis Presley, she didn't imagine the goodbye would become one of the most defining moments of the king's life. The year was 1962, and the atmosphere at Graceland was no longer the same. Anita lived a whirlwind of feelings. On one hand, she still loved Elvis deeply. On the other, she realized the relationship was already being corroded by secrets, absences, and mysterious phone calls. The man who once made her laugh with jokes and affectionate nicknames now seemed distant, restless, divided between two worlds that could no longer coexist. One morning, Anita overheard a conversation between Elvis and his father, Vernon Presley. What she heard was enough to confirm her suspicions. Elvis said he was confused, that he didn't know how to choose between the two women he loved. It was the moment he admitted, for the first time, the dilemma consuming him since returning from Germany. Anita went down the stairs crying and confronted Elvis. Words didn't need to be many. He tried to justify himself, saying he didn't want to hurt her, that everything had become bigger than he could control. But to Anita, that sounded like a goodbye. She got up, packed her bags, and left Graceland, never to return. The impact of this separation was profound. Elvis remained silent for days. His closest friends said he locked himself in his room and listened to gospel records, the genre he always used to reconnect with something more spiritual. Despite having been the one who created the impasse, the pain of losing Anita was real. For the first time, the man who seemed to have everything found himself unable to fix what really mattered. Anita, for her part, maintained her dignity. She never exposed Elvis publicly, nor took advantage of the romance to gain attention. She just moved on, carrying memories of a love that was born at the height of glory and ended in silence.
This was a decision that changed the destiny of everyone involved. In your opinion, did Anita do the right thing by leaving, or should she have fought for the man she loved? And if Elvis had stayed with her, do you believe his life would have been different? Comment down below. This is one of the biggest doubts among the King's fans. Meanwhile, Priscilla's presence began to grow. She still lived in Germany, but conversations with Elvis became more frequent. Over time, he convinced her parents to allow her to move to Memphis under the supervision of the Presley family. Officially, she was going to study, but everyone knew the real reason was the proximity to Elvis. From then on, Graceland became the setting for a new phase, a phase that still generated controversies and discussions among fans and biographers. For Elvis, Priscilla's arrival seemed to fill a void. She represented youth, innocence, and a kind of emotional peace he had sought since his mother's death. But at the same time, this relationship placed him under new pressure. He knew the world wouldn't easily understand this connection, and so he kept everything in discretion. For years, Priscilla lived between the shadow of fame and the shine of an idealized love. And Elvis, however much he tried to find balance, seemed to live in constant internal conflict. The episode with Anita, however, left deep marks on his personality. Many who knew him closely claim he was never the same after the separation. He became more reserved, less trusting of people. It was as if he had learned that even love could be swallowed by circumstances. In interviews in the following years, Elvis rarely mentioned Anita, but friends stated he still kept photos and mementos of the times the two lived as a common couple, far from the spotlights. The choice between Anita and Priscilla wasn't just a matter of romance. It symbolized the point where Elvis began to live completely under the weight of his public image. Everything he did, said, or felt needed to be measured, controlled, and thought out in terms of his career. From there on, the man and the myth began to distance themselves definitively. The passionate and spontaneous Elvis of the 50s gave way to the calculated and introspective Elvis of the 60s. It was the price of being the king. For Anita, the pain turned into learning. Years later, she would say in interviews that she held no grudge, but felt betrayed by the situation. She also said she understood the pressures Elvis faced, and that perhaps he didn't have the emotional maturity to deal with it all. Time gave her a kind of peace. She married, had children, and built a life far from glamour. But her story with Elvis continued to be one of the most talked about among fans. As for Elvis, that chapter shaped his future decisions. He sought stability in Priscilla, marrying her in 1967. But even this relationship, built under the ideal of happily ever after, would face its own crises. The man the world saw as invincible continued fighting the same insecurities and voids that accompanied him since youth. And deep down, perhaps part of him still wondered what would have happened if he had managed to keep Anita by his side. The love triangle between Elvis, Anita, and Priscilla was never just about feelings. It was also about the conflict between the human being and the symbol. Elvis lived trapped between the desire to be normal and the obligation to remain legendary. The request for silence made to Anita, the confession to his father, the tearful goodbye. All this shows that, behind the myth, there was a man trying desperately to reconcile love and responsibility. And perhaps this is one of the biggest reasons why his story still moves so many fans around the world. Because despite the fame, Elvis Presley was, in the end, someone who loved intensely, and who, like any of us, also made mistakes, lost, and suffered for love. This final chapter of the relationship with Anita wasn't the end of a common romance. It was the closing of an era, an era in which Elvis still believed he could control the course of his own life before fame and destiny swallowed him completely. And when Anita crossed the gates of Graceland for the last time, leaving behind the man she loved, perhaps it was there that the true Elvis began to disappear. Not the idol, but the simple man from Mississippi who just wanted to be loved back, far from the spotlights. And so we close another emotional chapter of Elvis Presley's life, a man who, even surrounded by fame, lived intense loves, difficult choices, and moments that made him even more human in the eyes of fans. If this story touched you in any way, don't leave without showing your support. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss any of the next episodes about the life and legacy of the King of Rock. Tell me here in the comments which part of this story surprised you the most: the letter, the request for silence, or Anita's goodbye? I really want to know your opinion. And of course, share this video with other fans who also love Elvis. That friend who knows every song by heart, or that relative who always speaks of Graceland with a sparkle in their eyes. Let's spread this story and keep alive the memory of an artist who marked generations. Thank you for watching until the end, and remember, here, the King's legacy never dies. It continues alive in every note, every story, and in every fan like you. See you in the next video.